My son cut me off for 15 years until I won the lottery. Then he invited me to meet my grandson. What I did next shocked him. I woke up alone on my 66th birthday, just like I had for the past 15 years. The small apartment in Denver felt emptier than usual as I shuffled to the kitchen and prepared my morning coffee. One sad little card sat on my table from the church, the only one that remembered. Beside it, the photo of my son, David, frozen in time. 15 years ago, the last photo I had of him. I touched his face through the glass, remembering the little boy who once couldn't sleep without my goodnight kiss, who'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. How did we get here? How did I become the mother whose son pretended she didn't exist? Working double shifts as a nurse after his father walked out wasn't a choice. It was survival. Every extra hour meant David could have the books he needed, the sports equipment, eventually college tuition paid in full by me. But to him, those hours translated to abandonment. My financial caution became controlling. My guidance became interference. The final breaking point came over $6,000. Just $6,000. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Mom. Novatech Industries is going to revolutionize the market. His eyes had burned with that familiar intensity. The same look he'd had with 3 previous sure things that burned through his savings. I can't, David. That money is for emergencies, I'd said. His face hardened into something I didn't recognize. You've always been like this, controlling, untrusting. How can you say you love me but not trust me? It's my money you want, not my love, I replied, words I'd regretted every day since. I made a decision that morning of my birthday. No more lonely anniversaries. 3 hours later, I was parked outside his Minneapolis home, a beautiful 2-story house in a neighborhood I could never have afforded on my nurse's salary. Through the window, I could see balloons. Of course, we shared the same birthday. My son was turning 41 today. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. The laughter inside immediately died. Footsteps approached, and then David, looking successful in his expensive sweater, his face instantly hardening at the sight of me. What are you doing here? The words fell like ice between us. Before I could answer, a woman appeared beside him. Laura, his wife. She assessed me with cool disdain. Today's not a good time, David said, already closing the door. But not before I caught a glimpse of a child running through the living room. A boy I'd never met. My grandson. Please, I whispered. I just wanted to wish you happy. You're not welcome here. I thought I made that clear. The door closed in my face, leaving me standing alone on the porch, tears streaming down my cheeks as the party resumed inside without missing a beat. 15 years of separation. And my own son couldn't spare me 5 minutes on our shared birthday. I drove home wondering what hurt worse, being rejected again, or knowing there was a child in there who didn't even know I existed. Months passed. I tried to bury myself in volunteer work at the local library, where pages that needed organizing didn't judge or reject you. That's where I met Clara Bennett, an elegant retired attorney with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You're carrying something heavy, she said one afternoon, sliding into the chair across from me. I recognized the look. At first, I deflected, but something about Clara's no-nonsense approach broke through my walls. Soon, I was telling her everything. David, the arrangement, my birthday disaster. Have you tried writing him? She asked. I laughed bitterly. Letters, emails, birthday cards, 15 years' worth either returned unopened or ignored completely. Clara nodded thoughtfully. But have you written the truth, Not what you think he wants to hear, but the raw truth. That night, I wrote by hand until my fingers cramped. I poured everything onto those pages. How my controlling nature came from terror of losing him like I'd lost his father. How watching him from a distance through mutual acquaintances had been my only connection to his life. How desperately I wanted to know my grandson. No excuses, just truth and an apology. 3 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived. My hands shook as I opened it, hope rising like a foolish bubble. Inside were the torn pieces of my letter ripped into jagged confetti. A yellow post-it note read simply, "Stop trying to enter our lives." I sat motionless, the torn pieces of my heart scattered across my lap just like the letter. In my bedroom closet was a box containing 15 years of unsent birthday gifts for a grandson who didn't know me. That night, I added the torn letter to the collection. At the library the next day, I overheard a mutual acquaintance mention David had been promoted to vice president of marketing at Summit Solutions. Not Novatech Industries, the company he'd wanted my $6,000 for. A quick internet search revealed Novatech had gone bankrupt 2 years after our falling out. Curiosity led me deeper online. David's social media showed a carefully curated life, a beautiful family vacationing in exotic locations. Below one beach photo, his caption read, "Celebrating my promotion. Who needs family when you have success?" I closed my laptop, a strange calm settling over me. 15 years of begging for scraps of affection was enough. I would stop fighting for someone who had written me out of his story so completely. That night, I took all the unsent cards and gifts and sealed them in a storage container, not throwing them away. I wasn't ready for that, but acknowledging they belonged to a reality that would never exist. Time to start living for myself, I whispered to the empty room. I had no idea how dramatically that decision would change everything. 1 year later, I barely recognized my life. My small circle of friends had grown. I joined a book club through the library. I even tried water aerobics at Clara's insistence, though I still maintained it with glorified splashing. "Anything else?" asked the cashier at Morgan's Market as I finished paying for my groceries. He gestured to the lottery ticket display. "Jackpot's up to $240 million. Everyone's buying tickets." I never played the lottery. Too many years watching patients gamble away rent money had soured me on games of chance. But something, perhaps the milestone of surviving a full year without contacting David, made me pause. "Why not 1 ticket?" I said, handing over $2. The ticket sat forgotten in my purse until 3 nights later, when I absent-mindedly turned on the evening news during dinner. The announcer's voice cut through my thoughts. "Tonight's Powerball numbers are..." My hands froze mid-bite as the numbers appeared on screen. Slowly, I reached for my purse, extracting the crumpled ticket. I checked once, twice, 3 times. My heart thundered so loudly, I could barely hear the announcer confirm there was a single winner in Denver, Colorado. I sat motionless in my chair until midnight, staring at the ticket. 240 million. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but it was. The attorney I contacted the next day looked equally stunned. "Miss Carter, you understand, that's $140 million after taxes as a lump sum payment?" I nodded, still numb. "Colorado allows winners to maintain some anonymity by claiming through trusts or LLCs," he explained. "The name will be public record, but we can create something generic." As he detailed the process, a memory surfaced. David's face when I'd refused him that $6,000. His bitterness that I didn't trust his judgment. Now here I sat, trying to process more money than I could comprehend. You have no idea how many people will come crawling out of the woodwork, the attorney warned. Family you haven't heard from in decades will suddenly remember how close you were. Family. The word hung in the air between us. David's face flashed in my mind, followed by the glimpse of my grandson I'd caught before the door closed in my face. A strange feeling settled over me. Not excitement or even happiness, but something sharper. For 15 years, I'd been powerless, begging for crumbs of attention. Now, for the first time, I held the cards. Set up the trust, I said quietly. And I'd like to discuss how to keep this as private as possible. As I left his office, stepping into the bright Denver sunshine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. 6 months passed while I followed my financial advisor's guidance. I established the Carter Family Trust to receive the lottery winnings, maintaining a low profile. Outwardly, nothing changed. I still volunteered at the library, lived in my apartment, and drove my 12-year-old Honda. "You're the most disciplined lottery winner I've ever seen," Clara remarked over coffee. As my only confidant, she'd watched me meticulously plan while rejecting the usual lottery winner splurges. "I learned discipline raising a child on a nurse's salary," I replied. "Besides, flashy spending attracts attention." I did allow myself one carefully calculated indulgence. A modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet Denver neighborhood. To explain the purchase to acquaintances, I casually mentioned selling family property in the Midwest that had been tied up in legal disputes for years. 6 months after claiming my winnings, I was arranging books at the library when my phone buzzed with an email notification. My heart stuttered when I saw the sender, David Carter. "Mom, it's been a while. Heard from Sarah Miller you moved to a nicer house. Everything okay? Maybe we could talk sometime." 15 years of silence. And now this casual message, as if we'd spoken last week. I leaned against the bookshelf, hands shaking. That evening, I researched Summit Solutions and discovered they were embroiled in a marketing ethics scandal. Several executives were under internal investigation. David's name appeared in multiple articles. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. David's sudden interest after 15 years, just as his professional life was imploding, and just after hearing I might have come into some money, I crafted a careful response. "David, it's nice to hear from you. Yes, I sold some family property and upgraded to a safer neighborhood. How are you and your family doing?" His reply came within minutes, warmer longer, mentioning his challenging work situation and introducing my grandson. "Ethan is 13 now. He's always wanted to meet his grandmother. Perhaps we could have lunch sometime. Always wanted to meet me." The boy who didn't know I existed until David needed something. I stared at my phone, a strange calm settling over me. For 15 years, I'd have given anything for this invitation. Now it felt hollow, transparent. Still, there was Ethan the innocent in all this, a child who deserved to know his grandmother, regardless of his parents' motives. "I'd love that," I replied, even as my mind began forming a plan. Minneapolis's Lake Calhoun restaurant was David's choice, upscale enough to impress with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Lake Calhoun. I arrived early, dressed simply but well in a blue dress I'd splurged on. My only visible concession to my new wealth was my car, a new Volvo SUV that I justified as safer for potential visits from a grandson. David, Laura, and Ethan arrived precisely on time. David looked thinner than I remembered, tension lining his handsome face. Laura was polished to perfection in designer clothes that couldn't quite hide her calculating gaze. And Ethan. My heart squeezed at the sight of him, tall for 13, with David's eyes and a cautious expression that broke my heart. "Ethan," I said softly, resisting the urge to hug him. "I'm so happy to finally meet you." The boy glanced uncertainly at his father before extending his hand formally. "Nice to meet you too, Mrs. Carter." "You can call me Grandma," I offered. Or Evelyn, if that's more comfortable. David steered us to our table, immediately dominating the conversation with stories about Ethan's academic achievements and sports victories, all told as if he were presenting a resume rather than describing a child. Throughout lunch, David and Laura peppered me with questions about my windfall from the family property. "Must have been significant to afford that neighborhood," Laura commented, eyeing my simple jewelry as if assessing its value. I deflected, focusing instead on Ethan. "What subjects do you enjoy in school?" His eyes lit up. "Science and history. I'm doing a project on immigration patterns right now." "Actually, my teacher says Ethan excels in everything," David interrupted. "Top of his class like I was?" I noticed how Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly at the interruption. How his enthusiasm dimmed. It reminded me painfully of David at that age when his father would dismiss his accomplishments. When the check arrived, David patted his pockets theatrically. "Seems I left my wallet in my other jacket." I smiled placidly, noting the expensive watch still on his wrist, and covered the bill without comment. In the parking lot, David casually mentioned, "We're going through a rough patch. The company's reorganizing and Ethan's private school tuition is due soon." I nodded noncommittally. "I'm just glad we're reconnecting." As David and Laura argued about something by their car, Ethan approached me hesitantly. "You don't seem sick," he said, voice low. "Sick." He glanced nervously toward his parents. "Dad said you had a brain disease that made you confused and weak. That's why you never visited or called." My heart froze. Before I could respond, David called sharply for Ethan. The boy quickly grabbed my phone, typing something before running back to his parents. Driving home, I checked my phone. Ethan had added his contact information with a simple message. "Can we talk?" "Sometimes?" Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't from sadness anymore. They were from something much more dangerous. Rage. David increased contact in the weeks following our lunch, each message thinly veiling references to his financial difficulties. Meanwhile, I developed a careful relationship with Ethan through text messages, never contradicting David's lies directly, but sharing stories of my active volunteer work and travel with friends. "Did you really climb Pikes Peak last year?" Ethan texted one evening. "Dad said your condition made it hard for you to even walk sometimes." "The view from the summit was breathtaking," I replied, attaching a photo of myself at Cheyenne Mountain Lodge. "I've always loved hiking." His response came quickly. "Dad must have been confused then." One afternoon, Ethan mentioned his upcoming history presentation. "It's about immigration patterns, including how your parents came to America. I wish you could come, but it's on a Thursday next month." My pulse quickened. "I could drive up for it. Really, I can put you on the visitor list. Each student gets 4 family slots." The day of the presentation, I arrived at Maplewood International Academy an hour early, heart-pounding as I signed in at the front office. The receptionist smiled warmly. "You must be Ethan's grandmother. He's so excited you're here." In the hallway, I met Mr. Thompson, Ethan's history teacher, who shook my hand enthusiastically. "Mrs. Carter, Ethan's been telling us you might come. It's wonderful to finally meet you." "Finally?" I asked. "Well, yes. After all these years of hearing about your condition, it's remarkable to see you doing so well." "Ethan did a whole project on neurodegenerative diseases last year based on your experience." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "My condition." Mr. Thompson looked suddenly uncomfortable. "The early onset dementia." David explained at every parent-teacher conference how you couldn't travel or handle social situations. Ethan even raised money for research. He trailed off, seeing my expression. "You didn't know." I steadied myself against the wall. David hadn't just cut me out of their lives. He'd created an elaborate fiction portraying me as mentally incompetent. While I was sending cards and letters begging to be included, he was telling everyone, including my own grandson, that I was too ill to function. The presentations began before I could process this revelation. I sat rigidly in the back row, watching Ethan speak confidently about his family history. Facts I'd shared in my texts, woven skillfully into his narrative. When he spotted me, his face lit up briefly before returning to his presentation. Afterward, as families mingled in the hallway, I saw David and Laura enter, scanning the crowd. David's face drained of color when he spotted me talking with Mr. Thompson. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, pulling me aside. "Ethan invited me," I replied calmly, though my heart raced. "Interesting thing, Mr. Thompson mentioned my condition, the dementia you've been describing to everyone for years." David's eyes darted around the room. "This isn't the place." "No," I agreed, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "It isn't, but we will discuss it, David, soon." As I walked away, Ethan caught up to me, beaming. "You came!" I hugged him, our first embrace. Over his shoulder, I caught David's gaze, cold and calculating. The lines had been drawn, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't the one at a disadvantage. He told everyone I had dementia. Clara nearly spilled her tea when I related the school revelation. "That's monstrous, Evelyn." I nodded, the shock having given way to a simmering fury I barely recognized in myself. While I was sending cards and gifts, he was telling Ethan I was too sick to even know who he was. Clara set down her cup with the precision of someone containing rage. "What's your next move?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to expose him, to tell Ethan everything, but that would only hurt the boy. And the other part, I met her gaze, steadily wants to understand how deep this goes. The next day, Clara connected me with James Morgan, a discreet private investigator whose services she'd used during her legal career. "Just information gathering," she assured me. "Nothing illegal." James's findings exceeded my darkest suspicions. David was drowning in debt, a mortgage, underwater credit cards, maxed out high-interest loans. The Summit Solutions scandal involved marketing campaigns that exaggerated benefits and downplayed side effects of certain medications with David's signature on the approvals. "He's looking at potential termination," James explained. "The company's conducting internal investigations before the FDA gets involved." Most disturbing was what James found in Ethan's school records. David and Laura had applied for his transfer to an international school in Toronto, Canada. The application required a substantial deposit and proof of Canadian residence within 30 days. They were planning to run using my money. David's pressure intensified, his hints growing less subtle. "Ethan's school is increasing tuition," he mentioned during one call. "And with the housing market what it is, we might need to downsize drastically." During a video chat, ostensibly for Ethan to show me his science project, Laura accidentally left investment brochures visible in the background featuring property developments in Toronto. I maintained my facade of oblivious sympathy. Sympathy while setting my trap. I mentioned my planned visit to a financial advisor, adjusting my will to include Ethan, and arranged for Laura to accidentally glimpse substantial bank statements in my purse during a brief coffee meeting, showing only a fraction of my wealth, but enough to hook them completely. "This is wrong," I whispered to Clara after describing my manipulations. "I'm becoming as calculating as they are." She squeezed my hand. "The difference is your endgame. They want to use you and disappear. You want to protect Ethan and possibly rebuild something real." That night, Ethan texted me. "Dad and Mom are fighting a lot. I heard them talking about Toronto again. Dad says you're the solution to everything if he can just close the deal soon. What does that mean?" I stared at my phone. Heartbreaking for this child caught in his parents' schemes. Whatever happened next, Ethan deserved better. "I'm not sure, sweetheart," I replied. "But don't worry. I promise I'll always be here for you, no matter what." It wasn't a promise I would break. Not like the ones David had been making all these years. "I appreciate you making time for dinner." "Just the two of us," David said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He'd chosen another expensive Minneapolis restaurant far beyond what his financial situation should allow. "Of course," I replied, studying my son across the table. In the soft lighting, I could still glimpse the boy I'd raised a flicker beneath the mask of the desperate man he'd become. David launched into an obviously rehearsed speech about family reconciliation, carefully crafted to pull at my heartstrings. "I've been too proud," he admitted with practiced humility, holding on to old grievances when we should be coming together as a family. I nodded encouragingly, noticing how his eyes flicked to my purse beside the table. "Ethan adores you," he continued. "He talks about you constantly. Having his grandmother in his life has been so meaningful." "I treasure our relationship," I said truthfully. "He's a remarkable boy." David leaned forward, voice dropping. "Mom, I've been meaning to discuss something important, an opportunity that could solve several problems at once." Here it comes, I thought. I'm starting a new venture, a consulting firm focused on pharmaceutical marketing compliance. The irony, right? He laughed without humor. With my insider knowledge of what not to do, I could help companies navigate regulations ethically. I maintained an interested expression as he outlined his business plan, noting how the projected startup costs conveniently matched his current debt load. "I'm offering you a chance to invest in something meaningful," he concluded. "Not just a business with excellent return potential, but in our family's future. If you help with this startup and maybe assist with our current cash flow challenges, I promise you'll be a permanent part of Ethan's life." My son was literally selling access to my grandson. "You're not asking for charity." I repeated his words back to him. "You're offering a partnership in business and family," he nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And we'd be nearby. Well, relatively nearby. Oh, Toronto has an emerging biotech sector. Ethan's already on the wait list for Maplewood International Academy there. It's very exclusive. Only accepts 55 students per grade. We need to secure his spot with a deposit by next week." I took a sip of water, buying time. "Toronto, Canada? That's quite a move." "A fresh start," he said smoothly. "For all of us, you could visit any time, just as James had discovered. They were planning to take my money and flee across the border." "I'll need to think about it," I said carefully. David's smile tightened. "Don't take too long. These opportunities have timelines." That night, a text from Ethan appeared. "Grandma, I overheard Mom and Dad fighting after you left. Dad says they need to close the deal with the old lady before she changes her mind." "I think they meant you. They're talking about moving to Canada, but they haven't told me anything. Please don't tell them I said this." I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, a strange calm settling over me. For 15 years, I'd mourned the loss of my relationship with David. Now I mourned something different, the man I'd thought my son was. It was time to end the charade. "I'm so pleased you could all come for the weekend," I said, welcoming David, Laura, and Ethan into my Denver home. I'd suggested they visit to discuss my investment decision. Bait they couldn't resist. My new house was comfortable, but not extravagant, a deliberate choice to maintain my cover story. Still, I noticed Laura's eyes cataloging every item, mentally calculating values. "Beautiful place, Mom," David said, his gaze lingering on the original artwork in my entryway. "Quite an upgrade from your apartment." "The family property sale worked out well," I replied vaguely. "Ethan, would you like to see the room I prepared for you? There's a telescope on the balcony. We have a clear view of Pikes Peak on good days." Throughout the weekend, I observed David and Laura carefully. They performed the roles of loving parents when they thought I was watching, but in unguarded moments, their impatience with Ethan was obvious. They interrupted his stories, dismissed his interests, and exchanged irritated glances when he asked questions. When alone with me, Ethan visibly relaxed his nervous stutter, disappearing his passion for science and history emerging in animated conversations. He reminded me so much of David at that age, before the bitterness took root. Saturday afternoon, while David and Laura went for a walk, really a strategy session, I suspected Ethan showed me a brochure he'd found in his father's briefcase. Maplewood International Academy, he said, pointing to photos of an imposing building in Toronto. Dad's briefcase was open and I saw it. I don't want to go there, Grandma. All my friends are in Minneapolis and I just found you. I hugged him tightly. Whatever happens, we won't lose touch again. I promise. That evening, I prepared a special dinner. I'd spent the day cooking David's childhood favorites: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, warm rolls, and apple pie for dessert. As we sat down, David and Laura exchanged knowing looks. They believed this nostalgic meal signaled my capitulation. After dinner, I invited everyone to the living room. I have something important to share, I announced, watching David and Laura lean forward eagerly. 15 years ago, David, you walked out of my life over money. $6,000 I wouldn't loan you. Today, it seems money is the only thing bringing you back. David's smile faltered. Mom, that's not fair. I raised my hand, silencing him. I hired a private investigator. The color drained from David's face as I placed a folder on the coffee table. He documented everything: the lies about my dementia, your financial problems, the Toronto plans you're hiding from Ethan, and the Summit Solutions investigation. I know why you suddenly remembered you had a mother after 15 years. Laura stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You spied on us. I protected myself, I corrected calmly. And Ethan, David's shock gave way to anger. So this whole reconciliation was just a setup. You're no better than you claim we are. The difference, I said quietly, is that I genuinely wanted to know my grandson. You just wanted my money. Ethan's voice broke through the tension. Is it true, Dad, about Grandma's disease, about Toronto? The silence that followed was all the confirmation he needed. The next morning, after a night of painful truths, we gathered again in my living room. David looked haggard. Laura tense, and Ethan, my heart ached for him, had the bewildered expression of a child whose world had shifted beneath his feet. I have a proposal, I said, placing a manila envelope on the coffee table. David eyed it suspiciously. More investigator reports number A, potential solution. I outlined my terms clearly. I would pay off their mortgage and establish an educational trust for Ethan with conditions. They must remain in Minneapolis. Ethan would spend 1 weekend a month with me. David would face the Summit Solutions situation honestly instead of fleeing. And most importantly, all of us, including me, would attend family therapy. You're bribing us, Laura said flatly. I'm offering a path forward, I corrected. Not just throwing money at the problem and hoping it disappears, which was your plan, wasn't it? David's face flushed with anger. You have no right to dictate our lives. No, I don't. You're free to decline, I agreed. You're free to decline. Continue with your Toronto plans if you can fund them. Try to outrun the Summit Solutions investigation. But Ethan stays in my life either way. You can't. I can petition for grandparent visitation rights. I interrupted, especially given the documented pattern of deception you've maintained. Clara has already prepared the paperwork. This was a calculated risk. Grandparent rights were difficult to enforce. But David didn't know that. You're blackmailing us, he said, voice shaking. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild something real, I replied. Not based on lies or money, but on honesty. It won't be easy. Trust has been broken on all sides, but Ethan deserves better than what any of us have given him so far. Laura, ever practical, studied the financial details in the envelope. We need time to discuss this. Ethan, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. Why did you lie about Grandma all these years? He asked his father. Why did you tell everyone she was sick? David wouldn't meet his son's eyes. It was complicated, Ethan. No, it wasn't. Ethan insisted, a new firmness in his voice. You lied because it was easier than telling the truth that you didn't want me to know her. In that moment, I saw something shift in my grandson. A recognition of adult fallibility that comes too early for some children. He looked at his father, not with anger, but with disappointment. Perhaps the most painful thing a parent can see in their child's eyes. I think Grandma's idea is good, Ethan said quietly. I want to try therapy. I want to stay in Minneapolis with my friends. And I want her in my life. David looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time, not as an extension of himself or a piece in his life's chess game, but as a separate person with thoughts and feelings of his own. Ethan, he began, but seemed unable to continue. Laura reached for the papers, her practical nature asserting itself. We'll review these terms, she said tightly. As they prepared to leave that afternoon, Ethan hugged me fiercely. I'll see you in 2 weeks, he whispered, no matter what they decide. It wasn't a question, but a statement, the first declaration of independence from a boy becoming his own person. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. 18. Months later, I adjust the birthday streamers in David's Minneapolis backyard. Today, we're celebrating 3 things. My 68th birthday, David's 43rd, and Ethan's middle school graduation. The gathering is small, just family. Clara, who drove up with me, and a few of Ethan's friends. The journey to this day wasn't smooth. David initially accepted my conditions more from necessity than choice. He cooperated with Summit Solutions' investigation, accepting a significant demotion rather than termination. Vanessa briefly considered divorce, but eventually recognized her own role in their problems, her status seeking, and willingness to overlook questionable choices to maintain their lifestyle. Our therapy sessions revealed painful truths. David's resentment over my long working hours when he was young. My fear of abandonment after his father left. Laura's insecurities stemming from her own dysfunctional family. We uncovered layers of hurt that had been festering for decades. The first 6 months were the hardest. David would shut down emotionally during sessions. Laura alternated between cooperation and passive aggression. I confronted my own guilt about controlling David too tightly in his youth. Ethan, caught in the middle, gradually found his voice, forcing us adults to see how our actions affected him. Ethan's monthly visits to Denver became sacred time, initially accompanied by either David or Laura, later on his own, once he turned 14. These visits provided respite from the tension that often lingered at home and created space for honest conversations away from the pressure of daily life. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. David, faced with the consequences of his choices and seeing how Ethan flourished with me in his life, started lowering his defenses. During one particularly difficult session, he finally admitted the truth behind his elaborate lie about my condition. It was easier to say you were sick than to admit I cut you out because of pride. And then I was trapped in the lie for years. Now, watching Ethan show David his science fair project on the patio, something unimaginable a year ago, I feel Laura approach with 2 glasses of lemonade. He still struggles to say it, she says, nodding toward David, but things are changing. He talked about you yesterday. Good memories he'd forgotten. Families are complicated, I reply. None of us gets it right all the time. Later, after everyone leaves, Ethan gives me his gift, a photo album he's created throughout the year, mixing old pictures of David and me with new ones of all of us together. On the last page is a recent photo of the 4 of us with a simple caption, "Family imperfect, but ours." I realized then that my true victory wasn't the lottery, which remains a secret I never fully revealed. Though David and Laura occasionally speculate about the true source of my funds, my victory was rediscovering that family isn't built on perfection, but persistence. Not with money, but with time. Not with revenge, but with the courage to face difficult truths and begin again, even when it seems impossible. That night in my hotel room, I finally opened the box where I'd kept the torn pieces of my letter and the gifts never delivered. I select a few items to preserve as mementos of the journey, not as symbols of bitterness, but as markers of a difficult path that finally led somewhere better. The past can't be erased, but the future is still being written, one day at a time. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.